you're standing in the break room at work, refilling your water bottle, half listening to two coworkers discuss weekend plans either of them invited you to, the way you've half listened to 100 conversations like this one over your 6 years at this company, quietly filed under a category you stopped questioning a long time ago. Not disliked, exactly, just not quite worth the effort of including. Then your manager walks in, says your name a little too warmly, mentions, in front of both coworkers, that she saw the announcement about your sister's company going public, the one where you're apparently listed as an early investor, and asks, genuinely curious now in a way she's never once been curious about anything in your life before, whether that means what she thinks it means. You watch both coworkers turn around fully, for the first time in 6 years actually looking at you instead of through you, and you feel the specific, strange physics of a room rearranging itself in real time, chairs that were never offered suddenly available, a conversation that was closed to you 30 seconds ago suddenly, visibly, open. $4.2 million from a modest early stake in your sister's company that cost you $11,000 you genuinely couldn't afford at the time, borrowed against a stretched budget on nothing but faith in her and a gut feeling you'd never fully explain to anyone. You've been sitting on this exact fact for 3 weeks, quietly, the way you sit on most things, and the only reason the room knows now is a press release either of you controlled, and you watch, in real time, 6 years of a specific, low-grade social invisibility dissolve in under 90 seconds. Respect doesn't usually arrive the way people imagine it will, earned slowly through demonstrated character over years. Most of the time, it arrives all at once, the moment a room finally has information it can use to recalculate you, and the speed of that recalculation tells you more about the respect than almost anything that happens afterward. This is the part almost nobody explains honestly about the exact moment people learn you're no longer struggling. The shift isn't gradual, and it isn't really about you at all. It's about a room updating its math, instantly, and the specific things that room does next tell you exactly how much of the last 6 years was ever actually about your character in the first place. The two coworkers, Delano and Priya, don't wait long. Within the same week, you're invited to lunch for the first time in the company's history, an invitation delivered with a specific, breezy warmth that makes no reference at all to the 6 years of lunches you weren't invited to before it. You go, partly out of curiosity, partly because you're genuinely hungry and the alternative is eating alone at your desk the way you have most days for 6 years anyway. The conversation is easy, friendly, and you notice, about 20 minutes in, Delano steering it, gently but unmistakably, toward a question about whether you're taking any new investment opportunities, delivered with the specific, careful casualness of someone who's rehearsed the question more than once before finally asking it out loud. You don't say yes. You don't say no either, not directly, and you notice, watching his face, a small flicker of something when your answer doesn't land the way he'd hoped, a specific disappointment that tells you everything you need to know about which version of this lunch invitation was actually real. Priya, to her credit, doesn't ask anything about money at all, talks instead about a project you're both working on, genuinely curious about your actual opinion on it in a way that feels, comparatively, almost startling after 6 years of never once being asked. The room doesn't just update its respect. It updates its expectations, instantly, and watching exactly what those new expectations turn out to be, genuine curiosity, or a specific, careful angling toward what you might now be able to provide, tells you which coworkers were capable of respecting you the whole time and simply never had a reason to, and which ones only ever had room in their heads for a version of you worth their attention. Your landlord, Osric, who's owned the building you rent in for 11 years and has never once, in 3 years of tenancy, replied to a maintenance request in under 5 days, calls you personally the week after the news breaks, a call you almost don't answer because you don't recognize the number. He's warm, almost unrecognizably so, mentions the leaky faucet you reported 6 weeks ago that's still, as of this call, unfixed, and tells you he's sending someone out tomorrow morning, first thing, no charge for the service call, a specific gesture of goodwill that arrives, you notice, exactly 1 week after a very different kind of news about your finances became public. You thank him, genuinely, because the faucet does need fixing and you're not going to refuse the repair out of principle, but you notice something calcifying you during that call, a specific, quiet understanding that the 11 days you spent asking politely and being ignored, back before any of this, weren't actually about scheduling or workload the way he'd always framed it. They were about a category you'd occupied in his head, tenant not worth prioritizing, and the category simply updated the moment new information arrived. You mention this to your sister later that week, half laughing, half genuinely unsettled by how fast and how completely the shift happened, and she tells you something that reframes the whole pattern for you, having watched a much larger version of the exact same thing happen to her own life over the previous year. "It's never actually about you," she says. "It was never about you before, and it's not about you now either. It's about what people think you can do for them, and that number just changed for a lot of people at the same time." The landlord's sudden warmth teaches you something the coworkers' lunch invitation already hinted at. The respect that arrives this fast was rarely absent because of anything you did or failed to do. It was absent because you occupied a category that didn't yet justify anyone's effort, and the category updating overnight tells you the original neglect was never really personal at all, which is, in its own strange way, both a relief and a genuine loss. The family reaction is the one that costs you the most, and it starts with your Uncle Reginald, who's spent most family gatherings for the past decade delivering some version of gentle, well-meaning advice about getting serious with your career, a specific tone you'd absorbed for years as mild, low-grade family disappointment you'd mostly stopped reacting to. At the next family gathering after the news, Reginald finds you almost immediately, tells a story to the whole table about how he always knew you had good instincts, a story that bears almost no resemblance to any conversation you actually remember having with him over the previous 10 years, most of which involved him suggesting you consider a more stable career path. You let the story stand, mostly, because correcting it in front of the whole table feels like more effort than it's worth, but you notice your mother, sitting nearby, catch your eye for a brief second, the specific look of someone who remembers the actual history exactly as clearly as you do. Your mother pulls you aside later that evening, in the kitchen, and says something you hadn't expected, delivered quietly, almost apologetically. "I want you to know I never once doubted you," she says. "Even when everyone else did. I just never said it loud enough, because it felt like it wouldn't have mattered." You believe her, mostly, and you understand, standing in that kitchen, that her version of respect was never actually contingent on the outcome at all. She simply never had occasion to say it out loud, because nobody was asking her to defend you until there was suddenly a reason for the whole family to reconsider its opinion. Family respect that shifts this fast tells you something specific and uncomfortable. Much of what you'd absorbed for years as quiet disappointment was never really about your actual choices. It was about a family's collective, informal accounting of who was doing well and who wasn't, an accounting that updates instantly the moment new numbers arrive, regardless of whether anyone's actual character, including your own, changed even slightly in the meantime. The person whose reaction actually surprises you, the one you didn't expect to think about at all in the middle of this whole recalibration, is Halston, a guy from your graduating class who spent most of senior year making a specific kind of joke at your expense, the kind that gets remembered decades later specifically because of how casually cruel it was delivered. Halston reaches out on social media the week the news breaks, a friendly message referencing a shared class you barely remember taking together, congratulating you warmly, asking if you'd ever consider getting coffee sometime to catch up, a phrase doing a tremendous amount of quiet work for someone who spent an entire year making sure you knew exactly where you stood in his estimation back then. You don't respond right away. You sit with the message for a few days, turning over the specific, strange satisfaction of watching someone recalibrate an old hierarchy in real time, a satisfaction you're not entirely proud of feeling as intensely as you do. You eventually reply, politely, non-committally, and you notice, doing it, that some part of you had been quietly waiting for this exact message for over a decade without ever admitting it to yourself, a small, specific vindication that arrives now and lands, honestly, less satisfying than you'd always imagined it would. The old critic reaching out teaches you the most uncomfortable lesson of the entire recalibration, that some part of you had been keeping score the whole time too, waiting for exactly this moment, and getting it doesn't feel quite like victory. It feels more like proof that the whole system you'd been living inside, the one that measured your worth by a hierarchy you never chose, was real the entire time, on both sides, and you'd simply never had the leverage to see it clearly until now. The turning point, the one that actually reorganizes how you think about all of this rather than just how you feel about it, arrives in a conversation with your closest friend, Iolanthe, someone who's treated you exactly the same way through all 6 years of the invisible period and all 3 weeks of the visible one, without a single detectable shift in tone. You ask her, directly, half joking, whether she's noticed how differently everyone's been acting, and she says something that finally names the entire pattern for you clearly. "I noticed the day it happened," she says. "But I didn't need the new information to know how to treat you. I already knew you." You sit with that sentence for a long time afterward, because it draws the exact line the whole experience has been circling without you fully seeing it. The respect that shifts overnight was never really respect at all. It was a specific, transactional calculation waiting for enough data to run, and the only respect worth actually valuing, it turns out, is the kind that was already fully formed before there was ever any new information to base it on. The friend who never changed teaches you the whole lesson in a single sentence: that genuine respect doesn't wait for a press release to decide what you're worth, and the specific speed at which everyone else's respect arrived is the clearest evidence you'll ever get about which relationships were actually about you, and which ones were simply waiting, quietly, for a number large enough to finally justify the effort. You're back in the break room a few months later, refilling the same water bottle, and Delano and Priya are still friendly, still including you, and you're polite in return, genuinely, without any specific warmth behind it, a careful, functional cordiality that replaced the old invisibility without ever quite becoming real closeness. You think, some days, about the 29-year-old you were, standing in this exact break room for 6 years, quietly filed under a category nobody bothered to examine, and you understand now, watching the room's whole configuration finally settled into its new shape, that the fastest, most instructive lesson this whole experience taught you had nothing to do with money at all. It was about learning, all at once, exactly which relationships in your life had been real the entire time, and exactly which ones had simply been waiting, patiently, invisibly, for a number to finally arrive that made the effort worth their W.